Chris.
Sammy.
How's it going?
Good. How are you?
Wonderful.
Good.
Very good. Very good. All right. Our first live stream on Twitch.
Yeah. You know, I always try not to make myself feel like I'm about to enter a competition when doing something brand new. I for the longest time, you know, when I was giving lectures and things, what I would intentionally do is tell myself I'm not prepared, so that I would have this added level of anxiety, and it would make me feel like I was competing again. And that was something that I really I missed that. I missed that adrenaline rush, that fear, the anxiety that you're about to just go punish yourself for, you know, 8 to 9 hours. And you know, it's interesting that I think about conversations that I've had since then, and my approach is completely different. You know, I talked to a good friend of mine that got into this body flow, body energy thing, and it sounded like all a bunch of hocus pocus. And he said, you know what, Chris, he says, you know, when you do a seminar and it's a full day, what is that experience like from an energy standpoint? And I told him, I said, you know, I'm fired up at the start. And he says, yeah, but no, what do you like at the end? And I said, honestly, the first time I did it, I had to take a nap in the car on the way to the airport because I was so crushed. And what I credited that to was my level of energy. And he said, no. It's not about your energy output. It's that you pre-drain yourself before it even starts. And he said, so he said, do me a favor in your next seminar. And this was last July that I did this. He said to me, he said, what I want you to do is this: go in like you're prepared. Don't sit there and psych yourself up. Don't sit there and say you're not ready to make yourself more nervous. Have you ever messed up? And I'm like, no, not really. I'm prepared. I mean, I really do my work and I try and come in ready to deliver. And he said, well, that's what you should have then, that attitude that you've never messed up. Things are going to be great. And tell me how it goes afterwards. And I didn't think about it the next day. And when I did think about it, I thought about what those events were. And, you know, like I said, I normally take a nap afterwards, you know, or better yet, I can't even do anything, you know, I'm just no more talking. All my words are gone. And we were on our way up to the CrossFit Games. This was in Bloomington, Indiana. So we drove from Cookeville to Bloomington, did the seminar. And then we stayed in downtown Indianapolis, and that was probably from Bloomington to Indianapolis, another 45-minute drive. We check into a hotel, we get some basic provisions. We then decide to walk to a restaurant, and we sat at the bar and had a steak dinner, and we probably got to bed around midnight. Heidi and I did. And I woke up the next day when I started thinking about it, and the first thing that popped into my head was, I think yesterday was the best day of my life, because I was able to spend, you know, 3 hours at a bar counter with Heidi. We've been together, you know, 10 plus years, and talking with one another, and my energy level throughout the entire day, no nap, nothing, all the way through midnight, was consistent. And I felt really good about it, you know? Yeah. It was interesting.
Interesting. So how has 2020 been for you, besides all the craziness so far?
Dude, how about like for you? Yeah. Tough year, right?
Absolutely. I mean, we touched on our YouTube channel, folks. You can see that Chris did a very cool breakdown of the CrossFit Games event, so you might want to check this out. But just, you know, 2 minutes on the very special CrossFit Games.
I've got to say that every year I am more impressed with the ability of the athletes, the competency, and what they showcase to the world. CrossFit, it potentially had the risk of coming across as some kind of bizarre competition that you would partially watch while playing a game of pool. It had that risk. And what they've done though is showcase these athletes and the greatness that they can do in a variety of events that an athlete in that particular sport can relate to. And the performances that we are seeing year over year are pushing the boundaries of performance, human performance, that have never been seen before. The fact that we can see people run 5-minute miles and put 400 pounds over their head. These are mutually exclusive ends of the spectrum. And you're seeing, people with incredible strength deliver incredible endurance performances. And I like that. The problem that I see though is that, you watch Tia Claire Toomey and you watch Matt Fraser, they're so dominant. I worry that they're going to get bored. And selfishly, I would hate to see that. They'll pull a Michael Jordan, right? They'll just go, you know what? Well, I mean, we see it from Tia. She's going into bobsled. It's not quite minor league baseball, but still, it's a secondary sport where she is doing it because that it may hold more appeal.
Okay. Wow. That's interesting.
Yeah. To me, that is something that I would be disappointed to see happen, because I think that they're in their prime and they've got years in front of them where they can deliver performances that will really showcase what the human body can do. And that's the thing that CrossFit athletes can do better than any other specialist, because they're not extreme in terms of their physiology. They're more balanced. They have a more balanced, let's say, muscle fiber ratio that gives them an ability to work mutually different ends of the spectrum, which is cool. Yeah.
Talking about specialists. We've been fantasizing about talking about this special event for quite a long time. So the subject that we want to talk about, or use as a topic for today, is the Kipchoge world record from October 2019. And I think this is a topic that's very dear to you and something that's super interesting for the both of us. So we finally get a chance to get your opinion on it. And I would say I just share my screen here, and maybe you can...
Or we could just talk for a little bit about this. I find that this performance that Kipchoge that he did was truly... It was extraordinary. And if anybody who knows me knows that I love diving into the detail, and how is it possible that a guy who just 2 years prior was almost 3.5 minutes slower than this target time. And I know a lot of people are thinking, oh, 3.5 minutes, we're talking over a 2-hour period of time. And it's like, wait a minute. That amount of time for an athlete to improve is massive. It is a massive, massive number. I mean, the fractional gains that we try and get in terms of performance year over year are smaller than that, and we're incredibly pleased by those things. And so for a guy who is the best in the world, right? He's the world record holder in the marathon, to sit there and say, wait, you want me to drop 3 minutes of total time in order to go sub 2 hours? That's an incredible task. And I'm impressed at his willingness to do it, because let's face it, he was on the world stage, and this was an achievement that is as great as Roger Bannister breaking 4 minutes in the mile. It is a phenomenal achievement. And it was such a stretch that it wasn't just like, oh, we need to go 1 second faster. We're talking 3 minutes. And I admire the courage that he had. And his journey to me is fascinating of how did he do that? Like, what were the ways in which you can chop out that amount of time? To me, that's impressive. But he had an amazing team. There was 400 people that were helping him, and he had the most wealthy person in all of the United Kingdom funding it. This is a budget that was unprecedented. And then you have the weight of Nike Corporation behind this. But imagine the pressure the guy felt. I mean, that pressure must have been monumental, and you never saw it. And maybe it was because it was his second attempt.
Yep.
Yeah. So I think that, just diving into it, with what he did, I mean, let's talk about it. He ran 26.2 miles. So that's 42,195 meters. That target time that he had of breaking 2 hours, that's a 4 minute and 33 second mile pace. So think about that. That's 100 meters. You're running 100 meters in a little over 17 seconds. 1708 or 17.1 seconds for 100 meters. So that's 422 of those back to back in 17 seconds. That's what we talk about. That's a massive, massive performance. And the thing is that you got to recognize that this guy, this is his specialty. He is an endurance athlete, but he specializes now in this distance. He was 33 years old at the time, so he's 34 now, which is a prime age for an elite marathon runner, in that 32 to 36-year-old range. His body type, he's a small guy. I mean, you could see him here in the photo in the white.
Interesting. How come that age is, I mean, you hear pretty much very often that this kind of like 30s or by the end of 20s is like the prime time for an athlete. Why is that with marathon runners a little higher age-wise? 33 seems, I'm 33 and it seems oldish.
You're in your prime. You're in your
let's go run. Let's go run. I'll run tomorrow.
Well, because there's these three main factors when we look at a marathon. We look at your VO2 max. So this is your aerobic capacity, and when we look at aerobic capacity, this VO2, this is your maximum oxygen uptake. This is the amount of oxygen that you can bring in from the outside and consume in the muscles that are moving. So in this case, it would be consumed in your running muscles. And we know that when an individual begins maturing, this VO2 reaches its genetic limit in your late 20s. It's your peak. And after about the 34, 35-year-old range, you begin to lose about 2% off of your VO2 max every year. And the reason for that is that as you age, you atrophy. Your muscles atrophy, your heart is a muscle, it atrophies. And so it's not able to push as much blood to the muscles that are moving. And then your blood carries less oxygen as you age. And then we lose, those two things really cause a shift or a downward slide in our VO2. So we start seeing shifts where our capacity, our aerobic capacity begins dropping after this age. Now, the reason why you see performance improvements up to that age, where there is no increase in VO2, is because they increase it in their speed that they run at, their maximum sustainable pace, their lactate threshold. And that intensity, that speed, that velocity, it doesn't matter if you're a man or a woman or old or young, you can continuously increase your maximum sustainable pace. And so long as you don't get downward pressure from your VO2. So part of it is that an older athlete can hit their genetic limit on their VO2 and maintain it while working on their sustainable speeds, working on their fuel economy. You know, think about it as a car. You can have a Ferrari with its miles per gallon, and then you could have a Prius with its miles per gallon. And both of them, let's say, are going 55 miles an hour. Well, the Prius is more economical, right? It gets better miles per gallon. Well, the same thing holds true with the ability to consume oxygen. Do you waste that oxygen? Or are you super efficient at the consumption of that? That takes years to develop, years. And so what you see is the accumulation of a lifetime of work by the time they get into their 30s, and they're able to carry that into their performances. That's why you see, you know, in the Ironman, Mark Allen, Dave Scott, you know, they're 40 years old and they were doing Kona in 8 hours. And so that's where it's for an elite endurance athlete, that's their prime. That really is, it's a hot spot for them.
Cool.
Yeah.
In the introduction, you said it's a team of 400 people that made this happen. That's like a medium-sized business, or even maybe a pretty large business. So I want to ask you. So we discussed before we went live about this. There was a specific formation that he ran with, and he did not run alone. So you are the pacing expert, I would say. So can you talk a little bit about the team that was running with him, and maybe touch on, you know, the first event when he did it in, I think, back in 2008? Were there any changes? Just, you know, the pacers is something that's super interesting to me.
Yeah, so there were 41 pacers, and the purpose of the pacers were to mitigate the aerodynamic resistance and reduce the energy expenditure for Kipchoge. That's what they were doing. And they had a lot of issues with these pacers, like what was the ideal formation? And you can see it in the image right there that you have. And what you can see is how they did that. And the way that they came up with this was that they ran several hundred different formation models. And they went in and did wind tunnel analysis. And what they were doing was trying to come up with the optimal shape. Now, what was interesting is the team that was supporting Kipchoge also worked with Team Sky, who is one of the most dominant cycling teams in the last 10 years. And they use Sky to really take what they've learned in cycling and try and apply it towards the sport of running.
Wow.
And yeah, but
didn't know that.
What's interesting is that the formation that they came up for with Kipchoge had never been done before. I mean, if you look at it, it's kind of like a reverse flying V. It's kind of like the way that birds fly, or it's the opposite what you see in the Tour de France, right? Those echelon formations, or when they're pulling like a pace line. I don't know. You have some photos of that you could maybe pull up of like cycling, so you can see.
Yep.
So in cycling, one of the things that they create these formations for is like I said, it's the aerodynamic resistance to mitigate that and to reduce the energy expenditure of the athletes that are following. And so, for example, in the Tour de France, let's go to another one. Do you have any other ones in that? I mean, do you have one of like a group? So like in the Tour de France, the domestiques basically sit in the front and they protect the person behind them who is the star of the team. And there are, in terms of positioning in a pack that's at the Tour de France, the difference between the lead person and someone who is sitting, let's say 15 people back, is it is a dramatic difference. Yeah, oh, this is good. So let me put my glasses on. Do you have another one? So what's interesting here is, so there's two different layouts. What I see, the top of the screen is layout number 1, and the bottom is layout number 2. And the difference is how close the cyclists are to one another. So in the top portion, you can see the diagram, the profile of the cyclist. They're basically a half a wheel in front. So they're basically one wheeling that other person, versus the one behind it. They're the same right behind. So they're a little further back. So the value I would expect in terms of aerodynamics and reduction of wind resistance and reduction of energy expenditure would be better in Peloton A. But do you have another one that dives into these? So one of the things that's been talked about in the sport of cycling is the aerodynamics of it and the reduction of wind resistance. And there was always this talk of being further back in the pack is like it's 50 to 70% easier. Well, the truth is that studies since then have come out, yeah, look at this, that are significantly more than 50%. So what you're looking at here is this, so this is your Peloton A, and you can go back 17 places. But you can see the difference between the difficulty as you go further back from place to place to place. And so the person here in the back is operating at 5% of the wind resistance that the person does in the front, which is dramatic. Do you have another one that we could look at? This is the thing, is that, having knowledge and awareness of positioning within a pack. So I've done a lot of bike racing, and one of the things that you realize is that if you're in a pack of over 100 people and you sit 2/3 of the way back, it's almost as if you're not doing anything. It really genuinely feels as if you're pedaling at an intensity of 10 miles an hour. Meanwhile, you're going 33, 34 miles an hour. Yeah, look at this. So look at the top portion there. So that's interesting to me. So this shows you wind tunnel resistance tests, and it shows you the difference between the difficulty of the person in front and the difficulty of the person in the back. These numbers that they're experiencing are truly incredible, that you can sit in the back 2/3, like I said, and essentially coast. And that's what people in the Tour de France talk about is that the protection that is offered in the back, it's a very efficient way to gobble up massive volumes of distance. The problem is it's incredibly dangerous. I mean, most of the people that drop out of the Tour happen because of an accident, and that accident always happens in that 2/3 of the spot. It's a dangerous place to be. But what's beautiful is that they use this type of information to come up with the formation for Kipchoge. And I think that you had an image of like a heat map. It's a wind map of Kipchoge, and similar to one of those in cycling, right?
Let me check. Yep.
And so part of it is coming up with yeah, that's it. Guess what? So which one was Kipchoge and which one's Kipchoge? So part of it is that, yeah, which one's Kipchoge in there? Well, I mean, he's the guy that's sitting, behind the 5 people in the front. Interestingly enough, the person that sits in front of Kipchoge, that's the captain. And that captain is responsible for making sure that the 4 people in front of him are in the correct spot. You can see that if you had a minor adjustment one way or another, it would make a dramatic impact on Kipchoge. And so the way they held this formation is that there was a pace car, and that pace car, it has a laser system, and that laser system essentially showed all of the athletes where they need to be. And so long as they maintained that spot, they were in the perfect position. And what they talked about was within centimeters. That was how important it was.
Wow.
Yeah. So what's interesting about this is, so they do all of this work. And then they realize that because he's protected from these elements, essentially what he is doing is he's running in a tailwind. He has the risk of overheating. And so that became a problem, because one of the things that they talked about when they selected Vienna to run this sub 2-hour event was the temperature. The temperature had to be in this ideal range for Kipchoge, which was 50 degrees, roughly 10 degrees Celsius. And so the problem is that now when you throw it into this formation, his heat will build up. And so one of the things that they had to address was, how do we resolve that? How do we resolve the heat? And part of the concern is that when the heat builds up, it's going to change his hydration levels. And that was part of the concern, was dehydration, and the risk associated with that.
One question, the two in the back, that's something that's interesting. So what are those two in the back doing?
Yeah, so that is interesting. So part of it is that the athlete in the back, what you realize is that there's forward thrust, with the people in the front, but there's also friction from the people behind. You also have up thrust, and then you have gravity. So you have these 4 elements that you're trying to mitigate. I mean, if you look at like auto racing, NASCAR, for example, one of the things they realize is that it's faster if you can get somebody behind you. And so part of it is that you want to make sure that you have someone behind so that there's less turbulence for Kipchoge. So look at the image that you have. Is everybody has that blue turbulence behind them, with the exception of Kipchoge, because the 2 people behind are sucking that down from Kipchoge. They're absorbing that. So they're taking on that friction, that air resistance friction. And yeah, that's why it's really it's genius that they came up with something original. This has never been done before, and they did it on this type of a scale. I mean, the pressure that people must have felt to take ownership of this. No, it's going to work. It's going to work. Is really cool. But dealing with his hydration was going to become an issue, and heat. And so the way that they solved the hydration issue was they had somebody that was essentially handing the bottles off to Kipchoge, and then they would pick up the bottle and they would measure the exact amount of fluids that Kipchoge was taking. So part of it is that he was taking a bottle every 5 kilometers. And so in his earlier attempt, when he tried to break 2 hours the last time, they didn't monitor this. And so one of the things that he ran into a problem when he tried to do this the year prior was they weren't tracking the amount of fluids he was taking in. And part of it is that his fluids contain carbohydrates. And if you don't monitor it, then how do you actually know you've had enough or too much? I mean, for anybody that's, that listens to this, think about this. You enter a marathon, and let's just say that the aid stations are every mile. How do you know how much fluids to take in? How do you know? How do you know how much sodium you should be having? Carbohydrates. How do you know how much you've taken and how much more that you need to take? How do you know if you've taken too much or too little? And so part of it is like, elites know this. They do. They practice it. But the recreational athlete doesn't. Matter of fact, there is a massive percentage. There was a study that came out on the 2002 Boston Marathon, and it looked at the runners that competed in Boston. And they were looking at their levels of hydration. And one of the things that this study found was there was a significant percentage of these runners that overconsumed fluids and that they gained weight during this marathon. And one of the problems with hyponatremia is that your sodium levels are going to drop because you're taking on too much water. And in many cases, most people do not have an electrolyte or a carb when they're running. They think water is the best solution, when in fact it's not the best solution. And so what happens is that their water levels begin to rise, sodium levels drop, and your cells begin to swell. And this swelling, it can lead to death. And so part of it is recognizing the importance of the nutritional aspect. And that's one of the things that this team did an amazing job on. It's an incredible thing to me, that the balance between too much hydration and too little hydration. When we talk about dehydration, the American College of Sports Medicine, ACSM, has come out, and they said that the 2% rule, that you will receive a performance reduction if you lose more than 2% of your body weight, and from water, sweat. And that to me is interesting, to find that balance. What's also interesting to me is that I recall back when I raced sport triathlons, Ironman in particular, I would weigh myself beforehand and I'd weigh myself afterwards, just because I was curious. I was fascinated by it. My race weight was about 150 pounds. And I would lose somewhere around 5 to 8 pounds of weight during an Ironman. And that is normal for an elite level performance, is to drop weight. Matter of fact, one of the biggest numbers ever was Haile Gebrselassie in 2009. And this guy, former world record holder, for some reason, Sammy, everybody seems to run Berlin and get a world record in the marathon.
I'm in Berlin, for the folks that are listening.
Yeah, I mean, it must be like, who knows? But he was 34 years old when he set the world record in Berlin. I ran under 2:04 for the marathon. I mean, and Gebrselassie is a stud. This guy is a beast of a man. He is one of the greatest distance runners in history. He's set almost 30 world records, 2-time gold medalist. He specialized in 10,000 meters, indoor outdoor world champion. And one of the things that came out when he ran the marathon in 2009 in Dubai was they measured his body weight before, and they measured his body weight afterwards. Now, keep in mind, Gebrselassie is 5'5", 119 pounds. And when he ran, afterwards, they weigh him, and he lost about 10% of his body weight. I want to say it was like 9.8%. It was about 11 or 12 pounds of weight loss, which goes in the face of what the ACSM says, that you will see a dramatic performance improvement starting at 2% percentage weight loss. Well, here's a guy that almost lost 10, right? So at 119 pounds, the guy loses almost 12 pounds of body weight.
Interesting. So
yeah. And the guy ran 2:05:29. Like, I mean, his time of running 2:05 in the marathon, and lost almost 10% of his body weight.
Wow. So for the folks watching us live, maybe, familiar. Most people come from the CrossFit space, knowing you. I think that's an interesting nugget of information in regards to longer time domains in the sport of CrossFit. So hydration in watts or workouts that take longer. What's your kind of like just throwing it in there, hot take on this in CrossFit?
Well, part of it is that we need to have a better understanding of hydration and nutrition in terms of performance. And so, like, if we're talking about just hydration and we look at what Gabriel Selassie did in running a 2:05 marathon and dropping, almost 10% of his body weight, how did that happen? How is a guy able to do that? Well, I mean, obviously he's a seasoned athlete and he trains that way. He's not surprised. And I think that a lot of athletes, because they don't practice different protocols, they don't train the way that they race, they're just not prepared. Now, what's also interesting is that, in running, we talk about it as aerobic power. You have to consider your body weight. When we look at VO2 max, for example, in the movement of running, we divide your VO2 max by your body weight. It's milliliters of oxygen per kilogram of body weight per minute. So if you do a VO2 max test today and you get a result and you weigh 200 pounds, and then you go back tomorrow and do the same test and you are now 190 pounds, you will see an increase in your aerobic power, your VO2 max, because you lost weight. Remember, if you have to carry more weight, you become more inefficient. So that's why when you see marathon runners and we say, oh, he's 5'5" and 115 pounds, it's because the weight matters. Rich Froning, for example, he's got an incredibly high VO2 in the movement of running, 74 milliliters per kilogram per minute at a weight of 198 pounds. If Rich can get down to 115 pounds, I think I could get him to run sub 205. Weight matters. And so part of it is that imagine you're a marathon runner and you are intentionally reducing your body weight by intentionally dehydrating yourself so that you carry less weight as you fatigue. Imagine if that's the strategy. That's a level of competency that's not in the sport of CrossFit, not even remotely close. Matter of fact, we're still trying to manage the consumption of carbohydrates and performance improvements related to just carbohydrate consumption and the timing of carbohydrates, the timing of it before, the timing of it during. Kipchoge, one of the things that they talk about is in the first attempt that he had, I think they called it breaking 2. So that was what, it was 2 years prior, right? It was May of 17. And the thing is that he missed breaking 2 hours. He ran 25 seconds slower. I don't know if you could, while I'm talking, Sammy, maybe, I don't know if you could find a chart of his paces that he held for every 5K in that. But one of the things that happened to Kipchoge in the first attempt was he started to fade dramatically. The last 5K is where he fell dramatically off pace. I want to say it was 10, maybe 12 seconds too slow. And that's why he one of the reasons why he didn't break 2 hours. And part of it is what they're saying is that it was the consumption of carbohydrate wasn't as accurate as it needed to be. The precision wasn't there. And part is that, we talk about this for more recreational runners when they run a marathon. when their body runs out of carbohydrates, that's what is called the hitting of the wall. And the wall essentially is your body is shifting from consuming of carbohydrates, glycogen, to fat as a fuel. And you can't maintain the same intensity burning fat as you can carbs. Your body can convert carbohydrates into energy much easier than it can of fat. It's easier to do that. So that's why high intensity efforts, we burn carb. Low intensity efforts, we burn fat. And although Kipchoge, without a doubt, is very fat adapted through his training protocols by doing long runs in a fasted state, the fact is that in order to produce 435 miles back to back to back, that carbohydrate consumption needs to be spot on. And what we saw from him was in that event something different. Do you have a were you able to find a chart?
Yeah, I'm still looking for it. So how does a guy like this pace himself? Like, do they train together, those with the pacers, or how? For somebody that doesn't know anything about it, like, do they practice together? Do they run together, or are those just like random professionals that get together for the event? How does that look like?
No, so there was a whole qualification process, and part of it is that they had to go into camp together and practice. So here they rotated. These pacers, what they did is they rotated because they weren't fast enough to run the speed that Kipchoge was doing, and so that was reason why this time that they did, it didn't count. That these pacers were rotating in and out. They rotated 2 times per lap. And one lap was roughly, 10,000 meters, 6.2 miles. And the rotation of them coming in and out, oh yeah, that's a good one. Going in and out was needed to be carefully orchestrated. It needed to be of how they were going to come in and how they were going to go out. And so practicing that was very important. The other thing that they had to do was they had to become comfortable, meaning their muscles had to become comfortable, efficient at running this particular speed. And so, yeah, all of the athletes that were training were very aware of what the specific pace was going to be. They were all very aware. So that was also a level of comfort, right? There was no surprises. Here's the speed, and this is the only speed. So what you see here is really interesting, right? You see the red line, which is the target. And now what you're seeing, and this is the first attempt. So this was in May of 2017. So, 2.5 years before. And what you're seeing is how he was doing relative to the target. And these are all broken up into 5K increments. And what you see is at 30 kilometers, that's when I see they fell off pace. That's the first alarm bell that's going off, because what happened that 5 kilometers, they were 2 seconds too fast. Now I know many people think that that's not very much, but this is a massive amount, and to make up 2 seconds is a tough task. And what you saw then is that I'm sorry, they missed it by 4 seconds in that 30 to 35K, and then 35. Yeah, and then 35K, they missed it by another 4. Yeah, that was the beginning of the end. And then he really fell off 14 seconds in the last 5,000 meters. To me, that shows something. That is an example of hitting the wall, that he ran out of glycogen stores and his body was making a shift to consuming or utilizing more fat, a higher percentage of fat as a fuel. So the thing is that for Kipchoge, most marathon runners, they'll burn about 3,500 calories in a marathon. For Kipchoge, because he's finishing faster than people, he'll burn somewhere around 2,500. And if you're burning 2,500, we know that at the start of the event, if he has done some form of carbohydrate loading, which he did, he started doing a carb loading protocol 72 hours out to increase the amount of glycogen storage that he had. But the storage that he had is, oh, good job. This is the fuel that he used. Nice work. So the fuel that he used is what you're looking at here. This company, what they do is they make a product.
Not a sponsor.
No, it's not. It's not a sponsor. But I've had this product, and it's a product that I recommend. And the reason is because it has the proper ratios of different types of sugars to maximize, and sodium to maximize absorption. And that is important. So part of it is that if we have a certain type of carbohydrate that we're taking in, the absorption rates are different. Matter of fact, the capacity, the amount of absorption, how many grams of carbohydrates can you absorb every hour is something that's important, because if you ingest too much carbohydrate or the concentration is too high, you're going to get a gastrointestinal like discomfort. You will get, some kind of stomach upset. And so those ratios are critical, and you need to know what you're capable of absorbing. And back in my day, the belief is that you can only absorb about 50 to 60 grams of carbohydrate per hour. And now what they're realizing is that if they can optimize the breakout and the percentages of different types of sugars going in, then you can get upwards of 90 grams. And that's important. That's a very important fact. So what you're seeing here is a recommendation by their site for an elite level marathon runner as far as recommendations of consumption of this product. And they're recommending it every 5 kilometers. For most elites, that's where their aid stations are, is every 5K. Scroll up and let's see what's in this. I can't remember. Is it in there? No. What if you click on that drink mix 320?
Yep. 1 second.
Yeah.
Nutrition facts.
So the glucose fructose combination, it leads to that higher oxidation rate, and that's what's in this product. It's cool that there's only 5 ingredients. But this is the product that he used during the event. His pre-race meal, I read, was oatmeal or some type of a porridge.
With milk or water?
Oh, yeah, I'm sure. Yeah, I'm sure it was just with water.
Yeah.
Yeah. So part of it is like, these products, you recognize you must have carbohydrates, you must have water. And so what you're trying to do is find the optimal ratio of those. And what you see there is the frequency that you need to be taking it. Now, guaranteed this guy is practicing that protocol in his training. And what you see in CrossFit, and this is an opportunity for someone who is aspiring to be an elite level CrossFitter. Do you even know your protocol in terms of carbohydrate requirements? Do you know? Do you know how much you sweat? What is your sweat loss in an event, right? If you do a 30-minute run and you're running at an 8-minute mile pace and it's 50 degrees, what's your sweat loss? Do you know? Do you know what your replacement rate needs to be? Are you calculating that replacement rate? What is your your pre-race meal, your mid-race meal, and your post-race meal. What are they? And, it's interesting to me that I still come across elite level CrossFitters and they finish a day of competition and they've got another 2 days to go and they go out and get a steak dinner. And unfortunately, that steak is still sitting in their stomach 48 hours later. It's to me, there is an incredible opportunity as far as dialing in that precision. Camille LeBlanc, I worked with Bezanet. I worked with her. I met her in June of 2013. And she won the games 13 months later. And one of the things that she did starting about 3 months after working together, she called and she said to me, she says, I need to become better on my last day. I need to put myself into a position to win. And my problem is that when I go in, I'm fatigued on that last day. It's difficult for me to warm up. It's difficult for me to cool down. My energy is low. And so what I need to do is I need to put myself into a better position. And what would you recommend? And I said, I think that you need to become more fat adapted. I think that what you need to do is you need to be able to consume your regular carbohydrate requirements and that we've had dialed in. But what I need you to be able to do is conserve the consumption of those carbs so that you have a higher percentage of carbohydrates than your competitors on that final day. And the truth is that if you deplete all of your carbohydrates on day one, it's going to take you upwards of 48 hours to bring them back. So day 2, you're starting at a deficit. Day 3, you're starting at a massive deficit. So at the CrossFit Games, there is a reason why that many athletes' performances tail off on that final day. And that has to do with their on-hand storage of glycogen, of carbs. So what we did with Camille is we focused on making her more fat adapted. And the way in which we did that was we targeted the long workouts that she did, long time domains. So just talking about the long run, if she was doing a weekly long run, which she would do, what I would like to see is her to have a light meal the night before, and then wake up in the morning and not eat. Ideally, you would do a small CrossFit workout, have water afterwards, and then maybe 2-3 hours after that. So we're talking about early afternoon. You'd go out and do a 15-mile run in a fasted state. And what will happen is that since there's no carbohydrates available, then what the body is going to be forced to do is utilize fat as a fuel because that's the only option. And what we did was over the next 9 months, 10 months of working that, she became incredibly adapted. And we substantiated that with the VO2 max test. And what we did is we looked at her respiratory exchange rates, and we saw that at lower respiratory exchange rates, the ratio of fats over carbs being utilized as a fuel had dramatically shifted. And that was one of the factors that went into why she won in 2014, is that on that final day, she had a higher amount of carbohydrates available to her. And so Kipchoge, and marathon runners and endurance athletes, we all know that. And so that is something that over his years and years of training, he's become incredibly efficient at the consumption of his calories. So what happens like in a marathon, I'll tell you a funny story. So my first marathon I did was Oakland Marathon. And I entered it only because I wanted to do the Ironman in Hawaii, and the Ironman in Hawaii has a 26.2 mile marathon. And so I didn't know anything. I was 17 years old. And I figured if I have to run a marathon, I guess the best way to train for a marathon is to run one. So I entered the Oakland Marathon, and what a disaster. So I show up and I'm kind of milling around the starting line and super nervous. And I see a guy that looks my body type. He's a lot older than me. He's probably in his 30s. And I look at him and I'm like, wow, he's kind of my size. Well, when I was 17, I was probably 130 pounds, 5'10". And I didn't know that that's what runners look like. I had no idea, the value of weight and the importance of weight and carrying it 26.2 miles. And so I went up to this guy and I'm like, hey, I'm just curious, do you have a target time that you're going to run in today? And he's like, yeah, I do. And he says, I'm going to go 3 hours. And to me, 3 hours is a nice round number. I didn't know what it meant. I had no idea. And so the guy's I said to him, I said, well, what kind of a pace is that? Like, what's that every mile? And he says, it's 6:50. And I remember thinking, well, God, I wish it was 7, so it'd be easier to do the math. It's like 6:50. It's like, it's so naive. And so, but genetically, it wasn't that I wasn't fit then. I was fit. I just wasn't a runner. And so we start out and we're on pace. I mean, halfway through, we're at sub 90 minutes. And it was like, just ready to go, like keep moving. But when I got to about 17 miles, something shifted. And it was like that first alarm bell went off. And when that alarm bell goes off and it's like, you say to yourself, like, something's not right. And what we always will do is we'll say to ourselves, I'm going to slow down for a little bit. I'm going to catch my breath, maybe shake my arms out. And then when I recover, I'm just going to ramp back up again. And we do all those things with the exception of the ramp back up. We just established our new speed. That's because we don't have the energy anymore or the stamina to be able to maintain the speed that we were once at. So the wall is in a marathon that you only have a certain amount of carbohydrate stores available to you. We just don't have that enough to carry us the entire length of a marathon. And so if you don't consume enough, or if you don't absorb enough, then what happens is we run out of those carbs. And when we do, because we still have miles to go, we have to get our energy to contract our muscles from somewhere. And what happens is it shifts from carbs to fat. And when that occurs, our speed slows. And that's what a wall is on a marathon, is it's a shift. And so as much as you would want to run faster, there's nothing you can do about it because you don't have the source of energy to contract the muscles the way that they once were. And that's where, like in the CrossFit space, there is no doubt that athletes have lost potential performance because of a lack of awareness in their nutrition. For example, I never see carb rinsing in CrossFit where you would rinse your mouth with carbohydrate. And that is proven without question to create a performance improvement. When have we ever seen that?
Interesting.
And so that's where you look at it. It's like there is a lot of opportunity here in terms of the consumption of carbohydrates for endurance performance. And what I mean by endurance performance is an endurance event. And if you are doing a multi-event competition that's even on 1 day, 2 days, or even the CrossFit Games, that's an endurance event. You better take care of your nutrition. And if you're not doing it mid-event, I'm convinced you're not doing it after the event. And all that's doing is putting you at a deficit.
Could that be because in CrossFit, people, because of the push of the paleo diet, low carb, is that maybe the reason why CrossFitters are kind of like carb adverse, or could that be a reason for it?
Yeah. So, it's funny is Camille told me early on, and Camille had a very feminine figure, right? Very, she always had a little belly on her. She always carried a little more body fat. And she said to me, she says, I look this way because I want to win. And I said, I'm, what do you mean? And she says, well, there's athletes that want to win and there's athletes that want to look good. And part of it is that if you restrict the amount of carbs that you have, then what's going to happen is you're going to burn fat, right? You're going to become more fat adapted. And if you're doing a bunch of high intensity training and you don't have this carbohydrate available to you, then you're going to start dropping body fat. And those are the athletes that underperform in endurance events. They don't have the resources to contract the muscles at the velocity that are needed.
Interesting.
Yeah. So yeah, that's where it's I think that a lot of it is we're talking about competing versus recreational. And, you know, when we learn in the level 1 about nutrition, and zone diet, and, you know, how much carbs and proteins and fats that we should be taking in, that's for improvement of diet, for the recreational athlete. And what I'm talking about here is trying to maximize performance. How are you going to be maximizing your performance? And this is an area of, in my opinion, tremendous opportunity, but it's also one that the sport's just not there yet. You know, there's a lot of things that I would love to be able to do in the sport of CrossFit that athletes and other coaches, they're just not there yet. I'm too much of a renegade. You know, one of the things that I'm playing a lot around with that we should have a conversation in is you know, I look at athletes and I break them down in terms of their physiology. Are you a fast twitch or a slow twitch dominant athlete? You know, I'm almost, you know, 88% slow twitch athlete. I should train differently. I mean, Sammy, you're a fast twitch athlete. I mean, what's your Fran time?
Oh, my best was 2:29.
Okay. Okay. So, and mine's like 6.5 minutes. And I have to single out the 95-pound thrusters at the end. It's heavy for me. And so you and I are completely different individuals. Why would we follow the same protocol? So if you and I went out on a long run and you wanted to match up with my speed, well, okay, so you could for a period of time. The problem is that if you keep trying to stick with my speed, for me, because I am an endurance athlete, which means that I'm slow twitch dominant, I am incredibly aerobically efficient, the ability to use oxygen. It also means that my ability to clear any accumulation of lactic acid is faster. It's more efficient than yours. My recovery is better. It's a major measure of aerobic fitness. So here we are, we're running along and I'm completely fine. But what's happening is that as we continue running longer and longer, your slow twitch fibers are going to begin to fail. And the problem is because you don't have a high percentage of slow twitch fibers, you're not going to be able to recycle their use. That's what muscular stamina is that you start out and you recruit a certain batch of motor units. And then as you continue, those fatigue, they fail, the brain shuts them off and it recruits another batch. And as you progress, you eventually come back to the original grouping of motor units that was recruited. And muscular stamina is one where if you don't do enough volume, then you're never going to challenge those initially recruited motor units to recover on the fly. And so that's where the stamina comes in. Elite marathon runners like Kipchoge run 150 miles in a week. So the 26.2 mile marathon isn't a muscular stamina failure. They're forcing those muscles to recover while running. So what will happen to you in our run is that you're going to end up running side by side with me. And because you have a fewer percentage available slow twitch fibers, you're going to not be able to recycle those for as long a period as I will. Mm-hmm. It's just the way it works. And so how are you going to continue the run? Well, you're going to have to recruit fast twitch fibers. And when you recruit your fast twitch fibers, now death is coming. You're going to die because you're going to start now using that glycolytic pathway, which is going to create that lactate and those fatigue causing properties. And because you can't clear that lactate in your slow twitch aerobic fibers, you're going to accumulate it. And as you accumulate it, motor units will shut down at a faster and faster rate until you're eventually forced to slow or stop. And so you and I should not do the same run. We shouldn't. But what if you need to be running at an 8-minute mile pace to be competitive? So what would you do? What you should do is run and then stop. Allow your slow twitch fibers to recover and then run again, so that you're never using those fast twitch fibers after the slow fail. So what you would do is, if you wanted to run at my speed, then that's how you would do it. If you needed to do a long continuous run, then what you would need to do is slow down. So part of it is the recognition that if we really wanted to squeeze out performance, then you need to be looking at the type of athlete, that athlete-centered model. You can't just do generic programming for an event, because generic doesn't take into account the athlete. And so part of it is diving into that, and that fast twitch, slow twitch concept that I just mentioned is a very advanced concept that only the elites within the sport of CrossFit are practicing. That will take some time. You remember the concept of pacing back in 2012 and 13? I mean,
yeah, when you came up with it,
I was not the most favorably looked upon person by CrossFit HQ, because that was something that I want to say it was in opposition to their protocol, but it was not in alignment. And now I find it interesting that they do interval style workouts at the games. And the truth is that what CrossFit, I have to commend them on. They've looked at the performance improvements by doing these types of things that I recommended, and they've adopted them, right? They brought me in as a subject matter expert even, and they recognize that their sport is evolving and changing, and there are other ways that haven't been showcased yet that may lead to performance improvements, and they're receptive to it, which I got to hand it to them. That's commendable. One of the things that we didn't talk about, which could be good, is I come from a swimming background, and when we look at the formation that Kipchoge had and the benefit that it brings, and we've talked about cycling and that benefit, we didn't talk really about swimming. Is one of them where drafting is critical, and there's dramatic improvements if we look at the movement of swimming and we look at drafting. And what you have up here is it's essentially two different techniques and type of drafting in the open water. And A and B are essentially the same. The difference is how the proximity of the swimmer that is following to the swimmer in front. And one of the things, and then the second one, C and D, is off to the side. Both of them, for the person behind, there is an improvement. There's a substantial improvement if you are that person behind. And so part of it is like in the sport of swimming, like how much is that? Like what would it be? I mean, we talk about, in cycling, that the person in front is going to be pedaling at 33 miles an hour, but the person in the middle or 2/3 of the way back, although they're moving at 33 miles an hour, it's going to feel like 9 miles an hour. In the movement of swimming, obviously speeds are significantly less, but the reduction in drag is significant because they're in water. And so when you're following somebody in the pool or in the open water, and you're like in that section A and B, then what you're looking at is you're probably somewhere in the range of about 9%, faster. than the person in front. And if you're off to the side, it's a little bit less than that. It's a little bit less than that if you're off to the side. But imagine if you're talking about a 8 to 9% improvement in your velocity, or better yet, let's just say that if you are a fast swimmer and you get behind somebody, it's not about the trying to maintain a speed that's 8% faster by following somebody. What I would do is, in the Ironman, I would sit behind the lead swimmer. And although I could have easily swam out in front of them and led, it was more efficient for me to stay behind them. And so when we look at efficiencies, what we talk about is that oxygen uptake. And if I am drafting on someone's toes and right on the toes, it's upwards of 25% easier. And so part of it is recognizing the importance of that. Do games athletes, do they understand the importance of that? If they had a choice of being off to the side or being behind, being, right on the toes or a half a meter behind the toes, should you be, if you're coming up on the side, should you be down by the knees, up by the hip? Where should you be? And there are percentages for every one of those locations. And part of it is dialing that in. I that one year at the Ironman, I was out in front, and I was with some other guy, and it was the two of us, and we were pretty far in front of the rest of the field, and it was really choppy. Matter of fact, there was a hurricane that was, fairly, it was far offshore, but it was enough to send in big waves. And it was causing me to hit his feet all the time. That's how close I was. And we had NBC Sports, they were following and filming the whole thing. And I kept tapping his foot. And if you've ever been in that situation where your foot gets hit, it's irritating, because I'm giving you a free ride and now you're trying to pester me. And I wasn't doing it on purpose, but it was enough where the guy in front of me stops in the middle of a swim in Ironman, the world championships, turns, I stop, pop my head up, and he turns and he says, "If you do that again, I'm going to stop him and punch you in the face." And I'm like, wow. Wow. And so, but part of it is that he knew exactly what I was doing. And so, like being a little bit more courteous, it wasn't intentional, but the fact is that it's an improvement. And, one of the things that, you think about on here is this will allow a better swimmer, a worse swimmer, to swim faster, let's say 8% faster by drafting off of somebody. Matter of fact, one of the things, I'll tell you a quick story before we go, is that in, I think 2017, they had a run, swim, run at the games. It was a 1.5 mile run. Yeah, it was a 500 meter swim, and it was a 1.5 mile run. And working with Fraser before that, we had a very good handle on the speed that he was going to do the 1.5 mile run. And that was practiced. To lock in that muscle memory. And his speed was going to be somewhere between a 520 mile pace and a 540 mile pace, which put him in first. He entered the water in first place. And what they did is they went in a counterclockwise position around a triangle. So he jumped in and then swam out to a buoy, and then made a left turn and swam on the way to another buoy, and then made another left, and then came in for the end of the 500 meters. And his pace target was about a 136 per 100 meter pace. That was the target that he should be able to hold for that. And then his back end run, that 1.5, would be between 5:40 and 6 minutes. So he rounds the first buoy in first place. Well, the faster swimmers started to catch him. And so imagine a faster swimmer starting to catch you, and you are aware of the percentages when you draft in swimming. And Matt is, a student of the game. It's one of the smartest in the sport, wants to learn and convert that information into knowledge through practice. And he does it over and over and over again. And he recognized, as soon as athletes would pass, to let them pass. So he would be right next to them, like in the image C and D, and he would get that that slipstream, that draft. And then as soon as they got in front of him, he would duck in right behind their toes, like on A. And what happened is that these fast athletes were catching him, but they were more than 8% faster than him. And so what would he do in order to stay with them? And one of the things that happened was that he had to accelerate his speed into a speed that was not sustainable. So just like you in that long run that we talked about, going too fast and using your fast twitch anaerobic fibers, now you're accumulating lactate. And what happened is Brett Fikowski, who's a faster swimmer but a much slower runner, eventually caught Matt halfway through this swim and caught him when Matt was bobbing up and down in the water. Matt almost drowned that day. And he pulls Fikowski's like, "You good? You good?" And Matt kind of shook himself, back alert, and kind of finished up the swim and then came in on the run. And, it's funny that he says that was one of his worst events that year. And he finished, I think, 5th or 6th after almost dying. But the thing is that he did something that was too fast for him. And now it presented, though, a problem, because what was the reasoning behind that? And this is where I think that CrossFit athletes need to do a careful examination of their strengths and weaknesses. Here you have, the greatest CrossFit athlete of all time, and the guy almost drowns. And what he wants to know now is, how did that happen, and how do we prevent that, and how do we make myself better? So the first thing that you recognize is that, what did he do when someone caught him? He had to go faster. But where did that speed come from? It primarily comes from your kick. You go from a 2-beat kick to 6-beat. So 6 kicks for every cycle of arm stroke versus 2. Well, when you do that, you consume more oxygen in the legs that are kicking. And if you're not aerobically efficient in your kick, which has nothing to do with your run, different movement has different utilization of oxygen, then what happens is you start consuming all of that available oxygen, and you go above a non-sustainable pace because of that. It's too fast for you. And so what happened for him is that, and it was a life lesson for me, and coming from a swimming background, I never thought about it. When he got into trouble, he couldn't do what he does when he gets into trouble on dry land. If you get in trouble, Sammy, on a run and you're dying, what do? You stop.
Yeah.
Well,
to catch my breath.
Right. But in swimming, what if you can't actually swim slow enough and recover? Meaning you drown.
Yep.
And so that's what happened. So what we realized is we have to improve the aerobic capacity of the kick. And so as we're swimming, in workouts, we did a lot of kicking, long fins for strength, endurance, and grinding volume. And then we did short fins to maintain the kick rates that we would normally do in regular swimming. And then we did no fins. And what would happen is that we would do these workouts. And when we would go to no fins, Matt would like, "I can't do the length of the pool. I can't do it. Like my hip flexors." And I'm all, "What?" He's all, "Aren't your hip flexors on fire?" And I told him, I said, "No, my kick is fine. It's good." But I thought it was interesting that it was within the kick that was the weakness, but within that kick, it was his hip flexors, which were the limitation within that movement. And so what we had to do is build up the muscular stamina of the hip flexor. And so doing things where we worked on volume, dry land, and building up that capacity. But that's where a true student of the game is, where you have a situation in an event, but you evaluate that situation afterwards. And what you do is you find areas of opportunity to improve. And that's what he does. And it went so deep that we realized the limitation in the hip flexor. And you see where athletes today don't do that. They don't look at performances afterwards and say, "This is where I need to improve." And I'm not talking about nutrition. I'm talking about just fitness and workouts and training. And there is a tremendous opportunity. But if you're not doing that, don't ever kid yourself. To beat a Matt Frazier, it's not going to happen, because you're not in tune with what you need in the direction that you want to go. You know, part of it is that if you're not looking at your performances afterwards, then how do you know where to go forward? Because it's your past that's dictating the direction forward.
So what you're saying essentially is like a football team that does kind of like video analysis after the game in order to prepare for the next game. That's something that you would highly advise competitive CrossFitters to do, because you know the best of the best is doing it.
Yep. So that same year, I worked with Sarah Sigmund's daughter, and she had in that run, swim, run one of the performances of her life. It was incredible. She finishes a run, swim, run of that magnitude, like a minute behind Sam Briggs, which is a dream event for Sam Briggs. She couldn't have written it better for herself. But then a couple days later, they have an event which was taking a heavy, like it was like what do they call it? Like a cheese curd ball, which was basically like a big sandbag that they had to throw over. I want to say it was like a 5-foot tall stack of hay bales. And then they had to do a burpee jump over the hay bale and throw that ball back and forth a series of times and blah, blah, blah. And then they would do a run for several rounds. And afterwards, talking with Sarah, she's like, that run was brutal. I don't know what happened. I couldn't get my speed. For some reason, I don't know what's wrong with my running. Well, in hindsight, that's what's important. You need to look at an event like that and go, was it her run that was really a problem? Or was it the other portion of the workout that made the run difficult? So for example, me, I can run a lap around the track in 60 seconds. But if you give me 15 thrusters at 95 pounds and then tell me to run a lap around the track, you would swear I'm a bad runner. Is it because my running is bad? Or is it because my thrusters are hurting my run? And I'm spending my run recovering from my thrusters. That's the type of work that you need to do.
Interesting.
Yeah, so that's why when I see things like with what Kipchoge did, I like looking at the hindsight. It tells you where you need to go. If you never look behind you, then you have no idea of your direction of the journey.
Oh. I think that's a perfect sentence to end this. Thank you. Thank you so much. My mind is blown. I think everybody who's listening to this and who's watching this afterwards, we will upload this on YouTube. So guys,
thanks,
if you don't have any questions, then thank you, Chris. Thank you so much for your time. And I hope that we will do this more often, give back to the community, provide some knowledge through you. And that was amazing. Thank you so much.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you, Sammy. Talk to you
Bye-bye.
soon.